Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to talk about wetlands tonight. This program is called Wonderful Wetlands. I am recording it as a reminder. So we're going to get started right away. I do want to let everybody know that the reason I was doing this, I originally was going to do this tomorrow, but it's going up tonight, is that tomorrow is World Wetlands Day, which is pretty exciting. And of course, it's Groundhog Day, so it's a twofer. It's a pretty big day. So that's why we're talking about wetlands this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Oops, I should share the screen. Ooh. Oh yeah, that was that helps me remember. And I also want to remind everybody to keep their mics muted so that because there's a lot of us on here, that'll be very, very helpful. So let's go ahead and start the program. If someone could let me know, can you see my pointer as I'm moving it around one of the leaves in the middle? Someone can just unmute and let me know if they can see that or not.
I can see it.
Fantastic, because that's going to help me later on when I want to point some things out. All right, so we're going to talk about wetlands tonight. As many of you know, I am a big fan of definitions, and I think it's important to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about some. So I went to the Collins Dictionary of Science, and it told me that a wetland is a permanently wet land area or habitat, and I didn't like that. So I got a second opinion, and I have a great book called Habitats of the World, and I'll show you the cover in a little bit, right near the end. And its definition of wetland is also very simple. It just says habitat that is frequently or permanently flooded. So it can be permanently flooded or it can be seasonally or regularly flooded, but not always. And that's an important distinction and allows us to make sure that we're including a lot of habitats. So here's kind of a gradation of different kinds of habitats that are still essentially wetlands. And, you know, even seasonally flooded forests can be that as well. But everything between this arrow here at the top, this is coastal wetland. You see we got swamp and marsh. Before we get to the open lake, these are all different types of wetland habitats. Okay, so wetland is a pretty open and inclusive word. The difference between swamp and marsh is really kind of simple. If you have a lot of trees or shrubs, if you have woody plants that are the main or dominant kind of plant in your wetland, that's a swamp. It's really simple. These are some bald cypress. This is down at First Landing State Park down near Virginia Beach, which if you ever get a chance to go is fantastic. It was great in November. I imagine it's even more interesting when there's a lot more critters out in the warmer parts of the year. A marsh is an area where you don't have the woody plants, but you still have an emergent vegetation. So an emergent means vegetation that's above the surface of the water. It's not underwater plants. It's plants that have grown through the water and emerged above the surface or come up above the surface. Sedges, reeds, cattails, any of those can be emergent vegetation. So that's the main difference between swamp and marsh. If you want to get really fancy, you can also, and I didn't go into that too much tonight, but I will mention that you can also talk about wetlands that are classified by their source of water. For example, you can have tidal wetlands, which get their water from ocean tides, estuaries where the tidal and river water mixes. There are freshwater estuaries too, but most of these, when you talk about an estuary, it's you got salt water coming in and you got fresh water coming in. It can be some amalgam of the two, often called brackish water. You can have floodplains where you get excess water from overflowed rivers or lakes, and those are a little more seasonal or temporary. Springs, seeps, and fens where you get groundwater that comes up onto the surface, and then like bogs and vernal ponds, which are fill up with rainfall or snow melt or other kinds of meltwater. And so those are different ways that you can classify a wetland by where their water is coming from. Oh, this is I got a little ahead of myself here. I think this is a Jug Bay out in Maryland, which is a fantastic wetland that I highly recommend. It's not on my list of wetlands I recommend later, but it should be. It's fantastic. This is, you see all this emergent vegetation. If you try to walk out there, you would get so stuck. That's a technical term for how stuck you would get, but that's definitely mucky and muddy. And it wouldn't be easy passing for someone who like me, who is big and tall and has relatively narrow, small feet. It would just sink into the mud like like you were sticking a post in there or something. And this is all, again, this is a marsh. It's all plant matter. There's nothing, no reeds, no shrubs or trees here. This is all pretty soft plant material there. And then don't forget vernal pools. Vernal pools are really, really important. The pond here at Gulf Branch is We've always considered a vernal pool. Last couple of years, it has not dried up in the middle of the summer, but typically it has in the past. The wetland on the drive in to Long Branch Nature Center, not the pond next to the Nature Center, but the wetland that you pass as you're driving in, that is also a temporary or vernal pool as well. And so these seasonal bodies of water can be really important for critters like wood frogs and spotted salamanders. We have both of those here in our nature center. They come in and they breed here, and they breed at Long Branch as well. And they depend on these kinds of bodies of water because there's no fish in them. Fish will be predators on the eggs. They'll be predators on the tadpoles or the larval salamanders. So they're predators on the youngsters, but they also bring in more predators by being there, because then you have fish hunting predators that come in. And I'm sure a lot of those predators are like, oh, fish, tadpole, no big deal. There's a tail that swims. I'm going to eat it. And so having a vernal pool or a body of water that does not have fish in it can be a pretty big deal. And there are, those amphibians are like the prettier, the glamorous members of that ecosystem, but there are other species that take advantage of these habitats as well. Even a temporary body of water like this, if you have a really deep spring rain, can seem or act like a vernal pool. You can find critters in there as well. This was in Reston several years ago before I started working in Arlington, and I think I remember rescuing a mass or two of wood frog eggs out of here, because I think wood frogs and even some toads had laid eggs in there that spring, and it stayed there for a while, but eventually started to dry up, and there was just nowhere for those tadpoles to go, and so we moved some of those eggs. Oh yeah, so and here's the Gulf Branch pool. That's not a real alligator. This is our April Fool's Day photo, but it was the easiest one I could find when I wanted to add this one in. But our pond definitely has some of its characteristics. It's got this water is actually really full, so you can't even see where we have the kind of island in the center or the high spot. But our pond has generally dried up during the summer. Why are wetlands important? And this is a big deal. This is why everybody talks about wetlands. This is why we're here tonight to discuss wetlands. They are really important. There's something called ecosystem services of natural systems. It's a fancy way of saying that here's what nature's already doing, and when we get rid of it, when we alter it, when we change it, then we're not able to have that service anymore. It will not do it, and it will not function the way. And these are services that people are, we're slowly realizing are really important, are really beneficial to us, and altering these areas and these places means that they don't do that for us anymore either, and that we also get that service as well. And I'll show you a couple of examples. And it's just important to remember that when we can preserve natural systems and they do these things for us, the areas are better, they're healthier, they allow more critters to live there, and it's easier for us to manage and less for us to do when they are fully functional and are able to go do all these things. And there are many kinds of ecosystem services. Not all of them are done by wetlands. And so that's important as well. Some are done by organisms, some are accomplished by habitats. One that's really important is, and I lumped a couple of these together: purification of water, detoxification and decomposition of waste, cycling and movement of nutrients. The plants and the critters that are in these wetlands help these things happen. When you have water moving through the system, plants slow that water down. They allow pollutants, and they allow other even natural nutrients and minerals that are in the water. When they slow the water down, they allow that to settle out, and so they're going to protect waterways from that. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. So that's really important. When you have a natural area like this, you've got cycling and movement of nutrients. That can be really important for things like carbon. Keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. And then, like I said, detoxification and decomposition of waste is going to happen here. Again, when you slow the water down, that waste, the pollution, all those things that you don't necessarily want in your lake, in your river, in your bay, they get slowed down and in wetlands, they get deposited in the sediments, and there are organisms in there that work and take care of them. It's not a perfect system. You can't just load all kinds of garbage and waste and pollution and stuff in here. That's not going to be good either. But they do help the systems the other systems they border on, like these big water bodies. They help keep some of that out of those water bodies, and then make that water cleaner for the organisms that are living there, and they make it cleaner for us who may be using that water as our water supply for drinking, for cooking and eating with, for washing, all those things. They make it make the water cleaner so that we have to clean it less. I hope that makes sense. Well, we have to do a lot less cleaning. And then, so one of the things you'll see along streams, you see these plants growing, and I chose this picture because it's on either side of this corridor of plants around this little strip of water, this little stream or river. You can see what are essentially fields, and this is certainly the one on the left here in the bottom left looks like a farm field. And there's all kinds of things that can run out of a farm field depending on what kind of agriculture they're doing. These plants are going to slow that down, or maybe even prevent a lot of that from getting into that waterway. Just by having a corridor here, it's a very, very helpful natural benefit to having these corridors, and they protect that water. And then also having all these plants here helps keep erosion from happening within that waterway as well. So that's all really, really important. If any of you have seen the video where they talk about the changes in Yellowstone as a result of the wolves coming back, one of the big benefits was because when the wolves came back and they were a more direct, they were a direct predator on elk, for example, the elk were spending a lot less time around the streams and eating the plants that were there, because there was a more open area and they were more exposed. And so they spent less time eating there, which meant they spent less time reducing the amount of plants next to the water. And those plants that were protecting the water were now able to grow thicker and more lush and provide that benefit and provide that protection for that waterway. So they helped increase or decrease the amount of erosion that happened in the stream bed, and it made it a better fishery. It was so many neat benefits from those wolves being in there. One of them was cleaning up these waterways, and because there was more cover, because there was less elk browse, there was a lot more habitat for species, and it was also a better stream habitat for some of the aquatic species like fish that needed less erosion, less dirt in the water, so they could reproduce in that water healthily and effectively. So this barrier of this riparian water, or this corridor, the plants next to the water, is really, really important. The water moves through it in both directions too, and we're going to talk about that next, because you have water going in and being cleaned, rainwater, meltwater that's coming down off of the land, going across the land, picking up things. It could be picking up, nutrients and minerals that can load into the stream, but it can also be picking up pollutions and pollutants. It can be picking up trash. It can be picking up other things that you don't want in there. And in the same way, if you get a lot of rain, if you get a lot of melt, if you have a storm surge from a hurricane or something else like that, these wetlands also act as a buffer of coastal areas from erosion, of river areas as well, especially when you have a lot of plants in there, and they can really shore that up with their root system. They can also mitigate flood. And when they hold a lot of water, they can also mitigate drought. They can moderate weather extremes. So these are very important, especially as we move forward and as we see some of the changes in the climate that are happening now. Having these natural systems in place is going to protect some of these more vulnerable areas, and that's very, very important. If you can see in the background of this photo, there's a wall there. You can build all the walls you want. That's not necessarily going to stop the water as well or as effectively, or storm surge as well or as effectively as the natural buffer of a wetland. Is there a question, or are we just okay? If you take a look here, this is Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuge. This is out near Smyrna, Delaware. You can see Leipzig's here, and I missed the one there. But you can see off to the right here, if you can see my arrow, this is the bay. If I remember correctly, this is Delaware Bay. And all of this wetland, this is all buffer. You can see, obviously water can still move up through all these waterways, but none of it's straight. There's not going to be a direct push. And so this, all this wetland here, all this area is going to help provide a barrier from any kind of storm surge. It's not perfect. You get a big enough storm and there's still going to be flooding. It's still going to come in, but it's going to minimize that. It's not going to be as horrible or as nasty as it could be. And so having these systems in place is really, really important. And in the same way, any water moving across the ground and heading out into the bay is being cleaned and or made cleaner by the wetland systems out here and the plants and things that are in that area. And so as we see more and more flooding events, this was the flood of 2019, was July 8th. This is the nature center entrance. You can see we had a ton of deposition of sand. I mean, our stream just ran crazy. It tipped out an entire bridge. It clogged up the culvert underneath here. Right where I'm standing is just the nature center drive side of where the culverts are. And it brought like trees down, logs, and blocked up the culvert, and the water just went up and over the road. To the right, there's this little curb here. That's where a pollinator garden was. It completely flattened the pollinator garden. There was so much water. And you can see there's a police officer here. He was stopping cars from driving through. I watched people still drive through, and that water was absolutely above the bottom of their door. I'm sure they didn't have a good result from that. But it was a pretty nasty flood. We got a lot of rain really quickly. And there's only so many places that water can go. We didn't have any of those buffer systems next to our stream, unfortunately. And the important thing to remember here is we're almost really talking about, think of it as like, the door to the kitchen in a restaurant. It opens both ways, and there's traffic that goes in both ways. And in the same way that this is surface in each direction, in one direction, water flowing out, during a storm surge, during a storm, when there's a lot of water going in, the wetland is going to help protect us from those droughts, from those floods, from erosion, from all these extreme weather events. And just as when the water has to move in the other direction through that wetland as well, it's helping clean the water, getting rid of toxins, and helping with decomposition, and helping cycling and movement of nutrients. It's giving that stuff a chance to slow down and drop out of the water that's moving through before it ends up in the bay or the river, the lake, whatever the case may be. So, for example, when we depend on an area like the Chesapeake Bay or the Potomac for our river, for our water supply. Having these kinds of wetlands along the edges of all those is going to be really important. Someone out there has their mic on. If they're able to mute that, that would be fantastic. Thanks. It's not terrible, but it would be great if it could be muted. They can also help with groundwater replenishment. These are prairie potholes. This is a wetland system that you'll find out in the Great Plains, so pretty west of here in the central part of the U.S. And these prairie potholes will actually help with replenishment of water. Some studies have found that wetlands can replenish up to 20% or 1/5 of their volume of water into groundwater when they, in a especially good season when there's a lot of water. Again, slowing the water as it moves across the land or gathering it into pools like this gives it a chance to soak in. If you take a sponge and you stick it under running water, the water's going to run over the sponge. But if you slow that water down, you could get it to a point, depending on how big and how absorbent your sponge is, where the water running on the sponge all gets soaked in before it gets to the edge of it and falls into the sink. And that's what these wetlands are able to do, is they're able to collect and hold that water in and give it a chance to obviously let things settle like some of the other services I just talked about, but also give that water a chance to trickle and percolate back into the groundwater and contribute to that as well. So this can be, and this is really important in those kinds of situations. And also, if you can look, you see all these spots here. The bigger that spot, the more water that's in it, the bigger that pothole, the more drought resistant that one is. Okay, so the more water that's there, if you have a dry time, you have hot, dry weather, the bigger your body of water, the longer it's going to take for it to dry out. And so that can be a boon to the animals in the area, but that's also going to help mitigate drought in really dry times as well. And again, obviously, wetlands provide a lot of important habitat for animals. These are American avocets. Obviously you can see there is a parent and some youngsters all waiting. Wading birds are really kind of specialized for wetland habitats, an area that's got very shallow water. They tend to have feet that are splayed out. They're really wide so that they can walk on these sediments and not sink in. Think of it as like a kind of almost like a version of a snowshoe, where they're really spreading out their weight across these really long toes on their feet so don't sink in. And they're using these really shallow areas to find the food that they eat. So these are avocets. I don't think we see them too much around here. This is a picture from National Park Service. I've seen them out in Delaware in the wetlands out there. I don't think they come in as much when they're migrating. It's not impossible, but it's not that likely. But it's not just birds that can use these sites to reproduce. Turtles can't lay their eggs underwater, but they certainly lay them near water so that the turtles, when they hatch, can make their way down the water. Obviously, amphibians lay their eggs in water. There are many insects that have aquatic life cycles. There's also insects that depend on plants that are living in the wetland. Many caterpillars can be host specific. Some are generalist, but a lot of them tend to prefer one or a couple plants in the same family. And so if it's a wetland, that's where they're going to find their food to eat. And of course, there are mammals like the little red fox here down in the corner. If you can see that dark shape behind the fox's left ear, that's actually a muskrat tail. This fox was well provisioned with food/toys to eat and or learn from its mother. This was a area up in Ohio a long time ago. It was really neat to see these two little fox kits playing with this dead muskrat. And there was I think a dead crappie and a few other parts of animals I couldn't identify. And they were just going to town until they were noticed, and then they were a lot shyer about being watched. But these are important habitats for organisms. Some that are very specific to what wetland areas or aquatic habitats, but also might very well need these kinds of sites to nest because they provide the appropriate amount of biodiversity for the food they need to feed their youngsters. They can also be important as stopover sites. These are red knots. I talk about this in my migration programs as well, but red knots migrate north and south, and they time their migration north to coincide with when the horseshoe crabs here on the right are laying their eggs in the bays along the shore, along the coast of the Atlantic, so that they can, when they come up and they stop over on their way further north here to their breeding grounds, they can take advantage of the horseshoe crabs' eggs that they're laying and feed on those. Obviously, they don't eat them all because we sell horseshoe crabs, but they do eat quite a bit, and they depend on those. And with a lot of places where wetlands have been removed, where walls have been built, or other pieces and parts of these coastlines have been developed for things other than, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation areas, for public use or for private use or whatever the case may be. The horseshoe crab in some of those areas have declined or disappeared, and now it's no longer a good place for the knots to come through. And so losing the habitat for the horseshoe crabs has really done a number on the population of the red knot, to the point where the red knot is currently listed as a red list species for the IUCN, and I'm pretty sure it's also listed as an endangered species in North America by the United States as well. So again, these sites are really important for stopover sites, for nesting, and they're even important for wintering. Now is a good time to me. Now is the best time to go out along the coast of the Delaware Bay to all those spots. Now is when I want to go out to Ocean City. When I want to go out to the beaches along there, because there's a lot less people. And there's a lot of really cool waterfowl. You can also get loons. You can get a lot of other species that have come down. And so these wetlands in the coastal areas are important as wintering sites as well for a lot of these waterfowl that just aren't going to stay, up in northern Canada or in the Arctic when it's really, really cold and that water is freezing. So these wetlands can be important wintering sites as well. This is actually Spokane, Washington. You get to see Canada geese, which you can see everywhere. And these are trumpeter swans swimming in front of them. And it's important for birds that don't sit on the water, that don't swim in the water, that don't eat things out of the water. This is a barn swallow, and they feed on the many, many insects that fly in and about and around the wetlands that are probably living and growing under the water of the wetlands. And when they emerge as adults, they are food for the barn swallows. So they still use the vegetation like these cattails to land and perch on to take a break while they're flying. They will roost and nest nearby, not in this vegetation. Barn swallows pretty much use, I think, I don't know if they totally use it, but it seems like almost every barn swallow I've seen, they're pretty much adapted to using human structures to nest. And so that's pretty much where they stay. So barn swallows also love parks that have wetlands because they tend to have human structures that they can use to nest on. And then they've obviously got the wetland and the food around as well. So for all these reasons, wetlands can be really, really important for wildlife. They're also important for us. They give us a sense of place. They give us a wild place to enjoy. Wetlands can be really good for ecotourism. You know, a nice big, well-maintained and take care of wetland can bring people in from other areas. I'll talk about a couple of those in a little bit. But wetlands are really important for that wild sense of place, for place people to go on the line, and people tend to really enjoy them. So it's another reason to keep them as well. So who lives in wetlands? I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and after I do this part, I'm gonna show you some different areas around here, some wetlands that I recommend if you want to get a closer look, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the critters that live in there as well. I spotlight a couple that are really neat. So obviously, I think that if you're thinking about this, it makes sense that if you are an animal and you live in water, you could live in wetlands. Now, obviously, there's some limits. You're not going to have big super big fish or like whales or porpoises, super big aquatic mammals, because obviously those are marine. There's a limit to how big certain wetlands are. But if you live in or near water, a wetland is a fantastic place to be. If you like to eat animals that live in or near water, a wetland is a super fantastic place to be. If you like to drink water, a wetland is a super fantastic place to be. And so wetlands tend to have really high biodiversity. Not all, but many do. And certainly around here, they can. I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy wetlands so much, is because I think in some ways, because of that biodiversity, you've got a better chance to see a lot more critters, and certainly some really pretty plants too. I tend to focus on animals. It's a flaw, it's a weakness, but I like to do that. Obviously there's going to be a lot of fish. This is a pumpkin seed. This is taken at Huntley Meadows. You can see some really good fish. The trouble with some wetland waters is they tend not to be this clear. That's a trouble for us. I'm sure the fish are okay with making it harder for them to be seen from predators in the air, as well as in and under the water and on top of the water. But there are some really neat fish that you can see in and around wetlands. And you'll get fish that are generalists, and you get fish that specialize in certain habitats as well. These are two insects. On the left is a dragonfly. On the right is a fly. It's a type of fly called a phantom crane fly. This is one that you can see here at Gulf Branch. You can actually find them near our pond occasionally and along the stream. This picture was taken, I think this was here because it's in a cup, which means I caught it. You can also see them at Huntley Meadows as well. I'll tell you where Huntley Meadows is in a little bit if you don't know. But it's big, beautiful. I mean, this is a really large fly. They can't hurt you. They don't bite. Really pretty, really dramatic to see. One of my favorites to look at. And their lifestyle, their larvae are aquatic, and I found them in our pond as well. And so it's really neat to see. But again, this wetland is important because it's where they lay their eggs. It's where they develop as larvae before they become adults, and so they often tend to still be around there because that's where they're going to want to lay the eggs for their next generation as well. And dragonflies are the same way. You can find dragonflies in a lot of different habitats, but their life cycle has an aquatic component. They lay eggs underwater. The eggs hatch. Their nymphs are aquatic. They feed on other aquatic life, and so whether they stick around or not after as adults, if they might go to a field, at some point they're going to come back to a wetland or some other kind of aquatic habitat to lay their eggs. So these are two really good examples of how important these areas can be to insects as well. And you'll have some critters that take advantage of the surface of the water as well. On the left is a type of water strider, and I want to make sure I'm saying that water strider, because on the right is a water spider. These are actually called fishing spiders. This is a six-spotted fishing spider, and it looks like it has another kind of spider in its jaws right there. I should know. I took the picture and I was looking. I'm like, oh, I think it's another spider. I don't think it's a molt that it came out of because it's too dark. It's already got its full-on color there. But they both use the water the same way. They can both run across the surface of the water. Water striders are much more active. You see them; they're pretty regular, and I think most people are familiar with them. And they will hunt and along the surface of the water, looking for anybody that got trapped in the water, and they'll grab them and eat them. If you can see if you can make out where the eyes are, which seems pretty obvious, the tiny, it looks like there's 4 legs around the eyes. It's actually 2 legs, the ones that are right next to the eyes, and then those 2 in front are the 2 structures in the front are actually the antennae. But these legs next to the eyes are actually raptorial, or grasping and grabbing front legs like you would see on the front of a praying mantis. And so there are 4 legs that they have on the water. They use the surface tension of the water to stay on top of the water. And that's how, and they scoot back and forth on the surface of the water. And then they have these front legs are not really, they might be help a little bit, but they're really for grabbing prey and holding it so they can eat it. And hopefully you can see that this is a mature adult, so it has wings. So if their body of water dries up or gets too scary, they can fly to a new body of water, which is pretty exciting. The spider on the right, as I mentioned, is a fishing spider. The genus name is Dolomedes. We have a couple species of Dolomedes you can find in Arlington. The others aren't necessarily as aquatic as this one is, a 6-spotted fishing spider. It can run across the surface of the water just like the water strider. If you are worried about that, it will run away from you. They're not interested at all in people. They can actually dive under the water up to, I think, 6 or 7 inches. They can trap water against the surface of their body with their hair. My favorite thing I like to do is if I catch one when I'm doing a pond program and I put them in a basin with some water, I will try to find like a large stick or a large flat piece of bark off of the wood chips that have been laid down for our path, and I'll put it in there. And if the spider gets scared enough, it will almost always zip over and run underneath and hold on underneath. And then everybody can look under and see the spider looks all silvery from all the oxygen that's trapped against its body. And that's how they hide. They find a spot underwater where they can safely hang out until danger passes. And with all the plants we have, they absolutely use that. They also lay their eggs they make a nursery web and lay their egg sac in there after they're done holding it. Their eggs hatch, and you have these big little nursery webs full of these spiders. And then when the wind is right, the baby spiders will crawl on the end of the leaves and release a piece of silk, a bit of silk, and it'll catch like a parachute, and they will float away to a new spot. So they're really neat. And again, we have these right here in the pond. You can also find these. Another one that you can find at Huntley. You find a lot of stuff at Huntley. You'll find some reptiles like this garter snake, which is really very much a generalist. Okay, and you can find them in lots of different habitats, but garter snakes do quite well in wet areas. This one was hunting the tadpoles in our pond. You find lots of different kinds of turtles, and I'll talk more about some turtles in a little bit. Painted turtles tend to be a pretty common species around here. They do quite well, and they tend to be one of the more common turtles you find in most wetland areas. This is a wetland on the border of Reston and Herndon called Sunrise Valley. And then here's a water snake, obviously a little more of a specialist in aquatic habitats. They're very good at hunting fish, have really sharp teeth, and their sharp teeth do really good at holding on to slippery fish. Did I? Yeah, I skipped amphibians somehow when I was making these slides. Again, because amphibians all have the majority of amphibians have to lay their eggs underwater. Wetlands tend to be a really good spot to find amphibians. Amphibians have moist, wet skin, wet, smooth skin. And so their skin, as long as it stays wet, they're able to breathe through it. So it's really important. So you don't tend to find them in really arid or dry areas. Their skin just doesn't do as good a job of protecting them from drying out as the scaly skin of reptiles does, for example. So they tend to be really important in wetlands. And then a lot of these critters will feed on them as well. My guess is that any of these species would be happy to take an appropriately sized tadpole as a bite, as a meal or morsel to eat. So that's there as well. And bullfrogs, which can get pretty large, could probably eat a young garter snake or water snake in reciprocal as well. So you have that going on. When you talk about birds and wetlands, people tend to focus on the birds that are there and not in other places. The big picture is a sora, which is a if you look at the feet there, you can see they've got really, really long toes. It's a wading bird. They like to hide in and among the emergent vegetation. So they're really, really hard to spot and see. They're not an easy bird to spot. Huntley Meadows, again, is a really good place for them. I think all these photos, the egret is not. The egret's from Delaware, but all these other photos are actually from Huntley Meadows. On the upper right is is Wilson snipe. And yes, snipe are real, and they are not terrifying monsters that young scouts are sent out with a sack to get with a flashlight in the middle of the night. These are another type of wading bird. You can see, hopefully, on the one that's standing there to the left, you can actually make out the feet a little bit as well, assuming that your picture looks as good as mine does. Again, you've got the larger herons and the egrets, like the great egret here in the bottom right. And of course, ducks. These are shovelers in the middle and to the left. The mama with all the tiny little youngsters is a hooded merganser. And so these are all birds that are, aquatic or wetland specialists that you're going to find there. You certainly find, you can find kingfishers as well. You'll find bald eagles and osprey in a lot of wetlands as well. But you also find a lot of songbirds that come through that are using the edges that are in the woods. And so they're there as well. And again, it's an easy and great spot to get water as well. So even if you don't need that water to live in, just about every creature needs water to drink, and that can be important as well. The difference between the shovelers here in the middle and the mergansers on the left, besides the physical differences, is that merganser is nesting in Huntley Meadows, and they're here, year-round nesting, whereas the shovelers are a winter bird that you're going to see, and they're off heading up north, and they'll be breeding and nesting, up in northern Canada or the Arctic Circle. And of course, mammals. You'll have some that are obligate, like muskrats. If you don't have water, you're not going to have muskrats or beaver. You'll have otters, which obviously are also critters that you're going to find in and around water. And then you have something like that's a generalist, like the raccoon. The raccoons are very good at living in all kinds of different habitats, but they'll absolutely happily use a wetland as well for the abundance of food that's there. And if you don't have a wetland, make your own. These two do. Beavers are very good at manipulating habitat so that it is exactly what they want. If they don't have the amount of water that they feel safe in, they build a dam until the water gets high enough that they do. And they are, I think, the only animal that changes their habitat as much as humans do, or to the extent that humans do, which of course, can cause conflicts with humans. And alligators tend to have deeper water holes. They tend to dig them out and to make them deeper, which means that during the dry season, the best place to find water is a gator hole. If you're an animal going to get water, good luck with that. That's not always the best result for you, but it does make sure that there's still water during the dry season, and those areas tend to have an increased biodiversity at that time because the animals all tend to congregate there, and of course it benefits the hungry alligator as well. So where can I see some wetlands? Hopefully I've intrigued you somewhat, and at this point you're interested in some wetlands. We have a little bit of wetlands in Arlington County. We have some good areas. As I mentioned, the two ponds at each nature center are nice little islands of wetland diversity at Long Branch and Gulf Branch. Gulf Branch is up here near the number 1. Long Branch is down here with Glen Carlin in number 6. Let's see here. I'm trying to remember what number 7 is. Number 4 is
Barcroft. 7 is Barcroft.
Barcroft. Yeah. There, we actually have a globally rare wetland community down in Barcroft. Thank you for saying that, Bernie, because I almost forgot. We have a globally rare magnolia bog down there, which we don't want people traipsing into because it's globally rare. And that's really, really exciting. It's back off the trail and it's not easy to find. But we also have, there's some wet areas and there's a stream there with some riparian areas as well. Number 3 is the Fort, and number 2 is Potomac Overlook, which has a couple of wet areas, but not really a wetland. If you go over here by number 4, this body of water here above number 4, which is actually on the west side of the GW Parkway, is Roach's Run. which is a big water area. It's great for waterfowl. Its edges are also a nice kind of wetland area, and it hosts a lot of wetland species as well.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
One of the gravel, whatever the name was. It seems to me it should have originally been an estuary to replace what the National Airport was taken out. There's used a lot of land just near 4 Mile Run that had been estuary. So they created this new one, but it doesn't seem to be like an estuary. It seems deeper. It's like
it very well could be, Bernie, because it does flow. The where the 4 is there's the bridge that goes under the GW Parkway. There is flow between it and the river, and I've seen that water flowing in both directions.
Yeah, but if it doesn't look that the mud flats which were removed were much shallower than that. That looks deeper, so it have a different set.
So where can I see some wetlands? Yeah, Bernie, I can't speak to that. I can try to find out and ask you later. I'm not sure what it replaced or how much of that was happening there.
Yeah, the way it was there was this, as you can tell, on the south side of 4 Mile Run, there's a wetland. Not wetland. It's a mud flats.
Okay.
And especially you see a lot of that south of where Hunting Creek comes in.
Yeah.
Well, they dug that out and they built National Airport on it. Now to remedy that, they built Roach's Run. That's wildflower sanctuary. But I'd say it looks like an entirely different set of species would go there. But it seems to be deeper than the mud flat. It's kind of something to look at, notice.
Yeah, when it dries up, it is flat more down here. If you can see my cursor, the area that's south of the underpass from GW Parkway, I think that does flatten out. They have a lot of stakes and stuff up there because I don't know if they're monitoring something or protecting something. And I think that was probably the area that was supposed to act as that mud flat. But whether it does or not, depending on the tide, is another story. But that's a good question. Thanks. One other point I want to point out here in Arlington. And it's this neat little area. I don't know if people know about it, but there's a little cattail pond in Bluemont Park. Aside from this large area here, there's a picnic pavilion right here, the Bluemont Park Picnic Pavilion. And this is a big open field area here, and it's separated from the stream from the bigger field off to the left on the map. And this cattail pond is right off the W&OD trail, and you can see some really neat stuff there. I once saw some black-crowned night herons that were hanging out in the trees a little further down, but you can get some good dragonflies in there. I was just talking to somebody who was on iNaturalist a lot, and they were telling me about some of the other things they've seen in there as well. It's just a neat little pond that you can explore and check out as far as wetland species.
Yeah, that was put in there as a water retention facility when they built the trail.
Gotcha.
When they constructed the trail through there, that was a stormwater retention facility, and they planted some of that stuff in there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's fantastic. This is a 12-spotted skimmer, and the only place I've seen them in the county, and it doesn't mean the only place that they're there, but it's the only place I've seen one in the county, and so I always enjoy popping in there to see what kind of dragonflies I can find. If you don't mind traveling a little bit further, to me, another great place is Teddy Roosevelt Island. If you can get down there, you got to park on the northbound portion of GW Parkway. If you can see the map here, there's a lot of trails. Pay attention to the map because I've been there several times and I still get myself turned around on a couple of the trails. But this long trail on the right goes through the wetland that's on the eastern side of the island, and it's pretty slick. You can see there's a little jut out here, and there's actually bald cypress in here. They were planted. They're not native. We're just north of their regular habitat, but you can see bald cypress here. There's actually one bald cypress. If you look through binoculars, you can see on the opposite side of Roach's Run if you're in the parking lot there as well. But there's a lot of neat dragonflies and damselflies you see in there. There's crayfish chimneys that you can spot along the trail. There's usually ducks and wading birds back here as well. If you don't mind traveling a little farther afield, you can head down to Alexandria. To me, this is one of the crown jewels of our region. Huntley Meadows Park is just absolutely fabulous. If you come in off of Lockheed and Harrison and you park in the parking lot, you can visit the Nature Center and head down in. And this is all right here that I'm circling with my pointer. This is all boardwalk that takes you right out into the middle of the marsh, and it's absolutely fabulous. You can also come in off of 633 here. There's a parking lot there, and go through the woods, which is a nice little walk. There's a lot of people that bike and jog and walk back there. And it comes out, it used to come out just to here, and now they've extended the trail here. So there's two different observation platforms on the opposite side of the marsh as well. You can find woodcock back in here as well, not necessarily a wetland species per se, but you can get some really neat stuff on either side of the trails here. I love Huntley Meadows. When people ask me what's a good place to go for wetland, this is always my first response because it's so accessible. It's easy to find. You know, if you have any mobility issues, it's all really flat as well. So to me, it seems very accessible. And I really enjoy it. There's always something good in there, even in the winter. Spring is amazing. The reptiles, the amphibians, the bugs, the birds, it's fantastic. I walk in and I take 400 photos every time I'm there. Something that you can't see in a lot of other places, but you have a decent chance of getting is a spotted turtle. These are not very common turtles. Huntley is a really good spot to find them. I once saw 6 in one day. I feel like Mickey Mouse and the old giant killer cartoon. But I did see you've seen several there, and it's a great place for them. They're really neat, pretty turtles, and you just don't see them too many other places. They also have musk turtle. They have mud turtle. You know, they have snappers and painted. They have sliders. They have a really good diversity of reptiles and amphibians, and it's definitely worth a really good checkout to get down there. You want to go a little bit further, less than an hour away, if you can get down around Lorton or Woodbridge. This is the Mason Neck Peninsula, and across Belmont Bay is the Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge. Mason Neck has a state park. It has a national wildlife refuge. They're contiguous, and there's a lot of different access points in there. Occoquan is my other favorite. If I have more time than going to Huntley, I will go down here. There's lots of good trails. If you can see my pointer, there's a painted turtle pond, which I think is something that they may have created. There's a new visitor center down there now, which I've actually never checked out, but it's on my list. This area here, just above Dawson Beach Road, this is a big wetland area. And if you follow it, it goes under the road here, and there's a whole gut that goes all the way through the center of this park. And you can see the end of it here, and you can also access the end of it here on these 2 trails. There's a couple of guts that come in off of the bay over here as well. Plus, you've got all this view of the river here, so you can get diving ducks and all kinds of great birds. It's just a fantastic place. There's a lot of good diversity as well. I've seen the spotted turtle and the mud turtles down here as well. It's a great place for osprey. You know, once they're back from migrating, if you go down there and you don't see osprey and a bald eagle, I don't know, maybe it was nighttime. It's really hard not to see some of these really cool birds there. This is a picture from Occoquan. I don't know why it let me get that close, but I got a really nice shot of it, and it's half-eaten fish. This is a striped mud turtle, which is one of the northernmost points that they've been seen in the U.S. I was pretty excited to find that as well. So again, there's a lot of good and interesting diversity. A couple years ago for my Father's Day gift, I came down early in the morning on Father's Day to hike around, and there was something magical about that day, like just a ton of dragonflies had recently emerged, and so they were all shiny and new, and I must have seen hundreds of dragonflies that morning, probably a dozen different species, including at least 1 or 2 that were new to me, and it was just fabulous. So again, this is a really amazing spot to go and visit if you like wetlands. If you want Mason Neck, you want to go on the other side, there's another national wildlife refuge here, that's Mason Neck. You can come down off the road here and either enter the park, where there's another parking space to access the refuge. You can hike through here, or you can drive all the way into the state park. This trail off to the left at this curve, and there's another boardwalk takes you through. It's not nearly as much boardwalk as like Huntley, but you'll find different species here you won't find at Huntley. You can also get onto the bay here and check things out as well. It's really fun park. This is also right now, it's a really good, right here is a really good spot for, tundras. So if you come in and take this trail back and come back here, you can see the camera icon. This is a good viewpoint to see tundra swans. You can also catch them from this trailhead as well. These parks exist because they're such a good spot for bald eagles. This was going to be developed at one point, and somebody, Elizabeth Hartwell, I believe at the time she was married to a member of Congress, and she didn't like this idea, and she mobilized, got a grassroots effort of people down there to say that we don't want to overdevelop this area. We need to be preserved. And her name's on the National Wildlife Refuge because of that effort, and because of her, she saved it. This is if I remember correctly, one of the best spots to see bald eagles in the winter on the East Coast. And so it's a good spot to get down there. I will say, let me see if I can get that rid of the picture for a minute. If you is it on the other one? Sorry, I'm going to go back. I want to go back here. If you go to me, I've seen the eagles here. If you go down to Pohick Bay Regional Park and hang out at that parking area, which in the winter there's nobody ever there because it's too cold to take your boats out. There's a boat ramp. Sometimes you can get really great ducks. I've never been down there and not seen a half dozen bald eagles. It's just a fabulous place to see eagles. If you want to go up into Maryland, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Historic Park. If you go on the Maryland side of Great Falls, there's the visitor center. The trail down here goes next to the canal, all the way down here. If you go out on the Billy Goat Trail, it's strenuous. It's not for everybody, but there are some really wild on this place here called Bear Island. There's some really neat spots up here of, temporary pools, where places where the water collect on the cliffs above the Potomac. But along the canal, there's all kinds of cool critters and things that you can see there. One of my favorite sightings spotted, I think this past summer. I've only ever seen a queen snake twice, and this was the second time. First time in Maryland, anywhere down here. We were standing next to the canal with a bunch of campers, and the sun's shining in. I'm like, "Hey guys, look! There's like 6 or 8 crayfish down there, and you can see them." And one of the other leaders goes, "Ken, there's a snake right here in the bush." And I looked over and it's a queen snake. They're a specialist on crayfish. And it was fantastic we stopped to look at the crayfish and ended up spotting the snake. And it was, obvious why it was there, because this is a great spot to get crayfish. So again, you'll find some of these critters that you can find a lot of generalists, but you can also find specialists that you're not going to find without a wetland. And if you don't mind a nice hour and a half drive, definitely not, it's more longer than an hour. Sometimes it's not always an hour and a half. This is Flag Ponds Nature Park, and it's on the Chesapeake Bay. You can see there's a lot of pools in here as well. There's also some wetland spaces in here to connect, to explore and, connect with yourself as well. But the critters here are fabulous. And I always like pointing out that when you're on the sand dunes, you can find some really interesting critters that blend in quite well, or that they're just so fast they don't ever get close. Also a fantastic place for dragonflies. There's some species I've seen here that I haven't seen anywhere close to here, like a gray petal tail and four-spotted pennant, I think was another one. So really good stuff. And again, osprey, eagle, a lot of shorebirds you'll find in these pools as well. And I've seen dolphins out here in the bay as well. So it's a really neat spot. So if you really want to see some cool stuff, though, if you want to go really big, the Amazon River Basin is probably the largest wetland area in the world. Just south of the Amazon River Basin is the Pantanal, which is a little more seasonal. Some of the specialist species you'll see down in there, you can see this purple area on the map. It's just south of that Amazon River Basin. And it's got some really amazing wildlife as well. You'll find sun bitterns and giant otters, capybara, that's a yellow-headed caracara on top of the capybara. The great rheas aren't necessarily out there when it's wet, but they're in the dry season. You'll find them moving out into the area as well. So there are species that use the wet time and use the dry time as well. The West Siberian Plain in Asia has a lot of floodplain in these areas that could be utilized by species out there like moose and brown bear. This is a Western capercaillie, which is a species of grouse that's native to there. And red crossbill is a bird you'll find around here. A couple of the bird species that specialize on conifer seeds, because most of the forests in that area, most of the forests in this area are conifer forests, and they can look and feel a little monotonous if you're there for walking and just kind of all looks the same. But there's a lot of areas, flooded areas that fill up that are boggy, and so you'll see moose, you'll see brown bear. You also see species I shouldn't say we're used to, because wolverine we're not used to, but it's from North America as well, like wolverine and red fox. And there's a few other bird species I mentioned, like pine grosbeak, that you'll also find in North America as well. Or there's the sunderbans. These are all, like I said, really large wetland areas that are really, really exotic. This is in Asia. It's actually along the the border of India and Bangladesh, this big green area here, all these deltas. A lot of this is mangrove area. Mangroves are not necessarily, mangrove forests are not necessarily as diverse as other wetlands, but they do have a lot of unique species that you don't find in other places. Asian water monitor, species of mud skipper, which are those really neat fish that can go in and out of the water. And then this is a crab-eating macaque. So obviously they have a lot of crabs there as well. He's searching for food in the muck there. So there's a lot of really neat and interesting and diverse wetland areas around the world. What can I do? Because I always get this question, and I'm not going to take a long time because it's 8 o'clock, and but I want to wrap it up here. But what can I do? You can help with habitat restoration. This is a floating platform to help give turtles a spot to bass. This is at the end of Lake Audubon, but it was a shady area, and it kind of acts in some ways as a wetland down there. So we're making it a little bit better for the turtles, giving them a spot where they can get out from under the trees and bass better. And when you improve habitat like this, either by doing that or by adding nesting sites and things like that, it really can improve the area and make it help with the diversity and help retain species in the area. And here we are counting wood frog egg masses in the pond here at Gulf Branch to make sure we know, keep track of it over the years and make sure the population is still healthy and returning and continuing to reproduce. You can help control invasive species. And wetlands can be a little different. It can be getting rid of really big toothy fish that you don't want to grab with your hands, like the snakehead. And just like any other habitat, there are invasive species in wetlands as well, like purple loosestrife, common reedgrass. There are even sometimes native species that you want to make sure don't overpower all the other species as well. And love your wetlands. Get out there and experience them and enjoy them, because when you love that wetlands, when you share that love, when you talk with other people about it, I know it sounds a little corny, but when you do that, and other people know you're enjoying it and other people get out there and experience it as well, that keeps them in the forefront of people's minds and makes them want to share and save and preserve these areas, because there aren't that many anymore. They used to, they got developed so often, and now that we know how valuable they are, it's harder for people to develop them, but it's not impossible. And don't forget to visit, contribute, and donate. Donate to organizations that are working to preserve and protect wetlands. Visit nature centers, visit zoos, visit museums, visit anybody that's talking about them, because when their numbers are up and they see the demand, that helps these areas as well. And that raises awareness and that raises funds. Contribute. Don't be afraid. Sometimes when you go to these areas, they don't have staff, so they don't have the pay area at the parks staff for somebody to pick it up. Put your $4 in anyways and help them out. Make sure that we're contributing and keeping these places open and afloat, because they're very, very important. Some of the information I talked about today, especially with the other ones, is from this book called Habitats of the World. I adore it. This is not a book that you're going to read that has a narrative. It's not a Ptolemy or an Ed Young book, but it has a lot of really fantastic and interesting information in it. And I'm really excited to keep moving through it. I've explored it some for this, but I can't wait to read the rest of it. I know we are at 8:02, so I appreciate all of you and your time. I'm going to go ahead and end this, see if there's any questions in the chat. I appreciate everybody coming out and hanging with me this evening, because I know it's an evening and it's not always the first thing I want to do. Any questions? And I will post a recording of this as well. But does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any comments? Well, thank you for hanging out with me this evening. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. And thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, and I got to send some emails. Y'all have a good night, and go love a wetland somewhere this weekend. Appreciate y'all.
Great job, Ken.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good job,
Thank you,
Ken.
Gary. Thank you, Bernie. Everybody have a good one. I appreciate everybody's nice comments as well. Thank you.
Really nice job.
Thank you.